Let me start by asking you something. When was the last time you woke up, checked the news, and thought, okay, this feels different? Not just another headline, not just another political argument, but something that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, something that made you realize the world you knew yesterday might not look the same tomorrow. That's exactly what happened on February 28, 2026. Because on that day, the United States and Israel launched a joint military operation that killed the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, in a strike on his compound in Tehran. And within hours, the entire Middle East was on fire. Iran launched hundreds of ballistic missiles and thousands of drones at targets across 9 countries simultaneously, not just at Israel. At U.S. military bases in Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Turkey, and the UAE. For the first time in modern history, Iran struck every single Gulf Cooperation Council country in one night. Oil prices blew past $100 a barrel. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's entire oil supply flows, came under threat of total blockade. Bangladesh started closing universities early because the country couldn't afford power. Pakistan and the Philippines both declared 4-day work weeks to conserve energy. The head of Saudi Aramco, the world's largest oil company, said the effects on the global economy could be drastic. Let that sink in. One operation, one night, and the entire planet started feeling it. So today, here on Unlocked History Hub, we're going to go deep into everything that has happened, how it started, what's happening right now as of March 2026, what it's doing to the rest of the world, and most importantly, what I genuinely believe this means for the next decade of global power. Because this is not just another war in a region that's always at war, this is a turning point, and you deserve to understand it fully. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome to Unlocked History Hub. We cover the stories that shape the world, told straight, with real analysis and no fluff. Hit subscribe right now and turn on the notification bell because we are covering this story in real time and you do not want to miss a single update. And if you've been here a while, you already know when a story this big breaks, this is the place to be. Now let's get into it. To understand why this war is different from everything that came before it, you have to go back and understand the chain of events that led to February 28th, 2026. It didn't start there. It really started on October 7th, 2023, when Hamas launched its attack on Israel and dragged the entire Middle East into an escalating spiral that almost nobody believed would end up here. What followed was nearly 2.5 years of conflict, proxy warfare, direct strikes, assassinations, and failed negotiations that set the stage for the most direct U.S. military confrontation with Iran since 1979. Let me walk you through the key moments, because each one matters. In 2024, Israel systematically dismantled Iran's axis of resistance, the network of proxy forces Tehran had spent decades building. Israel decapitated Hezbollah's leadership in Lebanon, killing Hassan Nasrallah in September 2024. The fall of Hezbollah's top command contributed directly to the fall of Assad's government in Syria in December 2024, removing one of Iran's closest regional allies. Iran exchanged direct missile strikes with Israel twice in 2024, and each time Iran's air defense vulnerabilities were exposed. Then came June 2025, what became known as the 12-Day War, when Israel and Iran fought their first ever open conventional military confrontation. Israel launched large-scale strikes hitting targets in 27 of Iran's provinces. The United States joined in with airstrikes targeting Iran's nuclear facilities. Iran retaliated by firing ballistic missiles at the Al Udeid air base in Qatar. The 12 days ended in a ceasefire, but the damage was done. Iran's nuclear infrastructure was severely degraded. Iran's air force and navy were badly weakened. And Iran's economy, already under pressure from years of sanctions, went into free fall. The Iranian currency collapsed. And then, on December 28, 2025, the Iranian people took to the streets in what became the largest protest movement in the country's history. Millions of Iranians, furious at decades of economic mismanagement and now facing the aftermath of a war their government had led them into, demanded regime change. The government's response was brutal. According to Iran's own Ministry of Health, at least 30,000 people were killed in the crackdown. 30,000. In their own streets. By their own government. President Trump warned of U.S. intervention. Iran ignored him. And that moment, that crackdown, became one of the final justifications used to authorize what happened next. In January and February 2026, the United States undertook its largest military buildup in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Aircraft carriers, fighter wings, missile defense systems, naval assets, all moved into position. Indirect nuclear negotiations between the U.S. and Iran were happening in February through Omani mediation. The Omani foreign minister said significant progress was being made. Iran was reportedly willing to make concessions, but Trump said he was not thrilled with the talks. And on February 28, 2026, before any deal could be finalized, the U.S. and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. The opening strike killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, along with several of his family members and dozens of senior military figures. The operation struck more than 5,000 targets across Iran's military and governmental infrastructure, and Iran, rather than collapsing, retaliated with everything it had. Hundreds of missiles and thousands of drones were fired at U.S. military installations and civilian infrastructure across the Gulf. Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman, the UAE, every Gulf monarchy that had spent decades staying carefully neutral, was suddenly on the receiving end of Iranian firepower. Energy infrastructure was hit. Civilian airports took damage. The luxury districts that had made Gulf cities famous as global financial hubs were targeted. For the first time since the tanker war of the 1980s, Iran was openly striking Gulf territory. The rules that had governed the region's unspoken security architecture for 40 years were shattered in a single night. Now let's talk about what's happening right now, as of March 2026, because this story is still unfolding in real time, and the situation on the ground changes daily. The U.S. and Israel have now struck more than 5,000 targets inside Iran. Tehran has been the most heavily hit city, but strikes have been recorded in at least 26 of Iran's 31 provinces. Historic sites in Isfahan, including the UNESCO-protected Nakshi Jahan Square, Chehel Sotun Palace, and the Shah Mosque, were damaged in strikes on March 9th. UNESCO has urged protection for Iranian heritage sites and issued similar warnings about historic sites in Israel, Lebanon, and across the region. The EU has condemned the strikes on Iran, calling them unacceptable and warning that civilian harm risks provoking further escalation. The UK has condemned Iran's retaliatory strikes while also making clear it opposes regime change from military force. As of March 11, 2026, Hezbollah in Lebanon re-entered the fight. After more than a year of an uneasy ceasefire, Hezbollah resumed firing on Israel on March 2nd, claiming it was a defensive act in response to the killing of Khamenei. Israel responded with airstrikes on Beirut, killing senior commanders from Iran's elite Quds force. Hezbollah then launched coordinated cluster munition strikes targeting the Haifa area of Israel, firing in coordination with Iranian missile barrages. The Lebanese government, which had been trying to disarm Hezbollah for months, found itself once again caught in the middle of a conflict it has no power to stop. And in Yemen, the Houthis, who had been quiet since October 2025 after a U.S.-brokered ceasefire ended their Red Sea shipping campaign, have restarted their threats in the Gulf of Aden. Security sources report the Houthis are planning operations in the Arabian Sea as well, potentially using cells established in East Africa. So let me paint the picture clearly. Right now, in March 2026, you have active military operations involving the United States, Israel, Iran, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen. Iran has struck every Gulf state. Oil prices are above $100 a barrel. The Strait of Hormuz is under threat. The death toll in Iran, Israel, and Lebanon has already crossed 2,000, with hundreds of thousands displaced. And there is no clear exit strategy on the table. Here's what I genuinely believe about the bigger picture, and I think this is the conversation that most people are missing. The assumption behind Operation Epic Fury was that killing Khamenei would cause the Iranian state to collapse. It hasn't. Iran's second son, Mojtaba Khamenei, was swiftly selected as the new supreme leader, with the full backing of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and key regime loyalists. Trump has oscillated between demanding unconditional surrender, calling for a popular uprising, and offering amnesty to military commanders who switch sides. None of it has produced results. The Iranian government has not capitulated. And what you have now, as Al Jazeera described it, is a war of attrition, where the U.S. and Israel have struck more than 5,000 targets and still don't have a decisive political outcome to show for it. The first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury alone cost the United States approximately $3.7 billion, mostly unbudgeted. Israel, already economically strained from years of conflict in Gaza and Lebanon, is facing mounting domestic pressure as millions of its citizens spend days in bunkers. This is not a quick, clean operation. This is starting to look like a long, expensive, deeply destabilizing conflict with no clear finish line. And the world is paying for it, literally and figuratively. Let me talk about the global impact, because this is where the story gets very personal for people who think this is someone else's problem. The Strait of Hormuz is the single most critical energy choke point on the planet. Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, Kuwait, Iran, and Qatar all export oil and gas through it. When Iran threatens or restricts traffic through the strait, the entire global energy market goes haywire. Oil is already past $100 a barrel. The IMF has said that every 10% increase in energy prices across 2026 is expected to drive global inflation up by nearly 0.5%. That means higher gas prices for American families, higher electricity bills in Europe, higher food costs everywhere, because farming and food transportation run on fuel. Pakistan has a 4-day work week now because of energy prices. Bangladesh closed its universities early. These are direct, real, human consequences of what is happening in the Gulf right now. And the G7 countries have so far declined to collectively tap their emergency oil reserves to stabilize prices. That decision alone tells you how diplomatically fractured the Western response to this crisis really is. Meanwhile, Russia and China, who both have deep strategic interests in a weakened, distracted United States, are watching carefully. Russia, already fighting its war in Ukraine, has an interest in high oil prices because it funds its military budget through energy exports. China, which imports massive quantities of Gulf oil, is now watching the United States simultaneously fight a trade war against Beijing and a shooting war in the Middle East, stretching American military and financial resources in two directions at once. That is a dangerous position for any global superpower to be in. Now here's where I'll share what I personally think this means for the next decade of global power, and why I believe the title of this video is not an exaggeration. First, the killing of Khamenei and the failure of the Iranian government to immediately collapse will likely harden the regime that survives him. History tells us that external military force rarely produces the political transformation the attackers are hoping for. Iraq didn't become a stable democracy after 2003. Libya didn't stabilize after Gaddafi. Afghanistan didn't turn into a success story. Every time a Western-led military force has tried to use bombs to achieve political transformation in the Islamic world, the outcome has been more chaos, not less. Iran in 2026 may follow the same tragic pattern. A weakened but more radicalized government, a population that was protesting against its leaders but may now rally around the flag in the face of foreign bombing, and a region that becomes even more unstable than it already was. Second, the Gulf states that were hit by Iranian missiles are now facing a fundamental reassessment of their security architecture. For decades, Gulf monarchies sheltered under U.S. military protection, while quietly hedging their bets with China and staying neutral on Iran. That neutrality just ended by force. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, they were all struck. Their populations were put at risk. Their oil infrastructure was threatened. How they respond to this going forward, whether they demand a stronger U.S. security umbrella, turn further toward China for economic diversification, or try to pursue peace deals with whoever emerges from Iran, will reshape the region's power dynamics for a generation. Third, the credibility of American military deterrence is on the line in a way it hasn't been since the Cold War. If Operation Epic Fury does not produce a decisive, relatively clean political resolution in Iran, and instead produces a prolonged conflict that drains U.S. resources, strains alliances, and triggers global energy instability, the message sent to every U.S. adversary around the world will be deeply alarming, and China will take notes. I believe we are at one of those rare moments in history where the decisions made in the next few weeks and months will genuinely determine the shape of global power for the next decade. The outcome in Iran will determine whether the U.S.-Israel alliance emerges from this as a dominant, respected force, or as a power that overreached and got mired in a conflict it couldn't control. The oil price trajectory will determine whether the global economy slides into a recession that empowers China and weakens the West. The behavior of Russia, China, and the Gulf states in response to all of this will redraw alliances in ways we can barely predict right now. This is not a story about a country most Americans will never visit. This is a story about the price of your gas, the stability of your retirement fund, the security of U.S. military commitments around the world, and the question of whether the rules-based international order that has defined global stability since 1945 can survive this era of direct great power confrontation. That's what's at stake, and we are going to keep covering every development right here on Unlocked History Hub. No spin, no fluff, just the story as it actually is. So if you haven't subscribed yet, do it right now. You're going to want to be part of this conversation as it continues to unfold. And speaking of conversation, I want to know what you think. Drop a comment below and tell me honestly, do you believe Operation Epic Fury was the right call? Or do you think this was a catastrophic strategic mistake that the world will be paying for years to come? There is no wrong answer here. Real people can disagree on this, and I genuinely want to hear your perspective. And if this video helped you understand what's happening in the world right now, share it with someone who needs to see it. A friend, a family member, someone in your circle who keeps asking what's going on, send them this video. Because the more people who understand what's actually happening, the better the conversation gets. The Middle East has always been a place where history is made fast and consequences last for decades. We are living through one of those moments right now. Stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll see you in the next one.